6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
How about we do it again?
6, 7, 4, 3, 2, 1. I think I followed it.
Okay, let's try one more
I
time.
definitely
Ready?
I can move you. Making review. Making review.
Say 6,
6,
5,
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Hello and welcome to another edition of Rank and Review. I am your host and random Canadian, Larry Parsons. And this episode I will be joined by Mr. Jason Dubray, he of the Shelf Shedding Movie Podcast, to talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman. You know, the guy who played Brant in The Big Lebowski? Oh, and one of the greatest actors of our lifetime, possibly, who unfortunately was taken from us far too early. Yeah, that's the subject of this. This is the second tribute episode that Jason and I have done together, and I think I picked a pretty good swath of the work from Philip Seymour Hoffman, but I would love to hear feedback. If you guys have anything you'd like to say about the podcast or about Philip Seymour Hoffman, you can write me at ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. The website is ranknreview.ca because I'm up in Canada. And if you need something else to put in your ears in the 2-week gap between episodes, do check out the Shelf Shedding Movie Show. It is worth your time. Jason knows what he's talking about, and he puts a lot of work into his show, so he deserves an audience. Now let's talk about Philip Seymour Hoffman. Mr. Jason Dubray of the Shelf Shedding Movie Show is back on the podcast. Thank you so much. We are here to talk about a fantastic actor taken from us too soon named Philip Seymour Hoffman. This is not the first tribute show that you and I have done. No. We talked about Robin Williams as well. And just like with Robin Williams, I looked at the IMDb page, and unlike Robin Williams, the rate to good to bad movies here are much stronger. And no disrespect to Robin Williams, but he did produce quite a lot of, C- and lower affairs. But what I noticed looking at his filmography is a lot of either low status, broken outsider, for lack of a better word, loser characters, played with enthusiasm and love. Like, a lot of times you'll see it and it's an honest betrayal, it's an unsympathetic betrayal. But for some reason with Philip Seymour Hoffman, these people seem real. There's this movie Love, Lisa, where he plays this guy who gets addicted to huffing gasoline, and that backloads him into getting into like miniature cars and planes, because that's where he's getting the fuel that he's huffing. And the description sounds like a terrible experience, but because it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, it's an interesting movie. Yeah. And his career is full of roles like that. Because it's Philip Seymour Hoffman, the movie's interesting. There's a Canadian-produced one called Owning Mahoney, where he plays a compulsive gambler.
He's good in that.
And again, an impenetrable, difficult character. And the movie doesn't give you a lot to solve the riddle, but somehow Philip Seymour Hoffman is so fully there that it works. The first time I remember noticing him, I was working at the radio station when I was in high school, and I did the premiere for Scent of a Woman. And he was in Scent of a Woman. He was one of the sleaziest of the kids that was screwing over the main character in that movie. And I noticed him, he talked a lot with his hands, and he was clearly making choices as an actor, and he stood out, didn't know his name. And then I watched Twister again for whatever reason, and I was like, oh, it's that guy again. It's that guy. Who's that? It was Boogie Nights, I think. Well, a combination of Boogie Nights and Almost Famous. I'm not sure where they came along timeline. But two high-profile supporting roles that made Philip Seymour Hoffman, the entity, lock into my mind. And I have a vast amount of respect for him, and that never changed. That never changed. Even though he will do things like Along Came Polly and The Hunger Games, probably for easy cash, he doesn't suck in them. Mm-hmm. He is a workman, was, unfortunately, a really solid workman character actor in an enviable position. Because he's not a movie star look, right? He's not a marquee face or figure. His silhouette looks a lot more like Alfred Hitchcock than Tom Cruise, right? But he's so good that he is a leading man. He is a star. So, I'm a fan. Where does Jason Dubray land?
Yeah, he built up to being a leading man from those roles. And I don't want to go, there's so many different directions to go, but Scent of a Woman was the first time I noticed him as well. And I noticed a lot of people, that was an important movie to me when I saw it at the time, because I was still pretty young, and it was just, to me, an amazing movie that I watched over and over again. And of the supporting characters, he really stuck out. I think being a more immature moviegoer at that time, I think he was so good at playing characters that I didn't really appreciate him until late 90s, because he's this entitled rich guy in that movie, and he's just horrible. I don't like that guy, because he played the role so effectively. And then I would see him in some other things, and I'm like, oh, I don't like that guy, but he keeps showing up and stuff, and he's kind of interesting. And he built his way there. It was actually 99 was where I started to really go like, whoa, like Talented Mr. Ripley and Magnolia, which we talked about. I think he was in some other movies that year. I think it was the next year was Almost Famous, and it was a couple of years after Boogie Nights, where he had some good scenes, but I don't think I realized how great a performance that was in Boogie Nights until I went back and looked at it again, because I was wowed by so many other things in that film. But very important actor. I keep thinking of, like, there's the other Hoffman, Dustin Hoffman, who's had this great long storied career, and that's where Philip Seymour Hoffman was kind of taking that torch for the next generation, and he was a great actor. One of the things we might end up talking about, and since he worked with at least one of these actors, but that year when he won for Capote, there were three just amazing performances to me. And Heath Ledger in Brokeback Mountain, Joaquin Phoenix was in the Johnny Cash movie Walk the Line,
right.
and then Capote, Philip Seymour Hoffman won. If you told me, like, of those three, somebody that we would die the way that the death happened, I would have thought Joaquin Phoenix is probably the number one candidate for that. So as I was saying, I mean, Joaquin Phoenix, he seemed like the most volatile guy at the time, and he's still with us, like, producing one interesting performance after another, and we're going to be talking about one of his interesting performances that he did with Philip Seymour Hoffman in this show here. It never struck me, and even after Heath Ledger went, that it seemed like Philip Seymour Hoffman, well, he's a solid guy. Something like that would never happen. But I have Brian Cox's book, my autobiography. It's called Putting the Rabbit in the Hat. I recommend it highly. I picked it up in Ireland and read it quite quickly. And he had a little piece on actors who have died too young, and a little thing on Philip Seymour Hoffman. And there was some stuff I kind of didn't necessarily know about Hoffman that might play into what kind of led him into the tragic death that he had. But I'll just read this. There has unfortunately and unavoidably been a great deal of death in this book. The product partly of my own longevity, but also the fact that my profession tends to produce what you might call extreme and obsessive characters. Philip Seymour Hoffman, for example, with whom I worked on 25th Hour for Spike Lee in 2002. He was the sweetest, funniest guy, but he had a darkness to him. It's a matter of public knowledge that he had abused drugs and alcohol during his college years, until at 22 he went into rehab and stayed sober for 23 years. Clearly he relapsed. Some years after the Spike Lee film, I did a couple of workshops with him. Whether he was back on the drugs then or not, I couldn't say. Just that he was very edgy and argumentative, not at all the delightful man I had met before. I want to contrast this with a movie that we're going to be talking about on my show, The Addiction. And in the supplemental materials, Christopher Walken is interviewed. And this was shortly after the death of Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Walken was just broken up about this. And he said, I don't know how this happened. Like he was such a lovely man, and he didn't party, and he wouldn't even take a drink. And so he was trying to reconcile how this guy could have ended up overdosing on heroin, but it sounds to me that he relapsed, and he probably was very secretive about it and then went too far. And it's a shame, because I think of he produced such great work in a short period of time, but what else could we have had for the next, as Watkins says, for the next 40 years? You could have amazing performances that changed cinema.
I'm of the mind that there was really nothing the guy could do. Like, it's hard not to think, because of the overdose and sort of the darkness of his end, that might not have been part of why he was drawn to characters that had that sort of darkness in them. Mm-hmm. One of his early successes, or again, early big roles that I remember him in, was in a movie that everybody likes way more than I do, called Happiness.
I was going to mention Happiness. That's
Todd Solondz, just generally as a rule, is kind of hard cheese for me. Mm-hmm. But again, his commitment to this terrible, pathetic, awful human being, but he gives him 1,000%. He gives him everything. It's a fully lived-in character, because that's what every character kind of deserves. And a lot of people would read The Guy's a Loser, put on kind of a schlubby walk and a schlubby voice, and that would be that. Not Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah. And
he has a whole catalog of losers. Even Lester Bangs, who's like a celebrated movie journalist, at his heart, he is a pathetic dweeby nerd. Like a very lovable, pathetic dweeby nerd. But that is very much there. And it's in the performance. We still like him, but we see him, warts and all. He
even says, "I'm not cool," in Almost Famous. Yeah.
But like, he still thinks he's cool on some level.
Yeah, he's above everything.
I can't just be standing here hanging out with my many fans, right? So I think our point has been made. I think we're both big fans, and we are, like everyone else, heartbroken over his loss. And
we're going to be talking about 6 completely different human beings embodied by the same man.
Yeah. And because he was so immensely talented, a lot of great directors worked with him. So I think you'll notice that a lot of these directors are actually familiar. Mm-hmm. Is there anything else you want to say about the man?
I will give a warning that this group of movies, I am a little bit more mixed on the movies themselves. It's kind of like the Robin Williams episode for me. High respect for Robin Williams, high respect for Philip Seymour Hoffman, but my reviews may come across as a bit negative for some of these. Okay. But again, I still want to make sure that at the center of this, we're celebrating this great actor who left us too soon.
Well, I think what's going to be coming up in this list a lot for me, maybe for you as well, is this strange line between a movie that is like truly great and a movie that is interesting, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said about this movie, but can you recommend it, or is it entertaining? Like, what are you getting from it? Sometimes I'm a big champion of things that are original, but original also sometimes breaking new ground is, dangerous. But we're going to talk about State and Main from writer director David Mamet. We're going to talk about Pirate Radio, which is also known as The Boat That Rocked, from, oh my goodness,
Richard Curtis, I believe.
Richard Curtis, thank you. And he's responsible for like Notting Hill and Love Actually, which is another movie that everybody seems to like more than I do. His Oscar-winning role in Capote. Man, I can't read anything anymore.
Bennett Miller is the director of that.
Thank you. Charlie Kaufman's directorial debut in Synecdoche, New York,
which someone calls Synecdoche.
Jason and I tend to talk a lot about Paul Thomas Anderson, so why should this episode be any different? So this is the not any way about Scientology motion picture called The Master. And we're going to finish with an animated movie called Mary and Max, because, yeah, I know it's just a voice performance, but I think people underrate the importance of a voice performance, and I don't think that movie's been seen enough, so... Those are the 6 Philip Seymour Hoffman movies we're going to talk. Thank you so much for being here.
You treat me like a child.
What's your problem?
She doesn't want to bear her breasts.
Why are we paying her $3 million?
They know what her breasts look like.
No, they can draw them from memory.
It takes all kinds.
Shouldn't you be in school?
It's night.
You know, she could be in the movie. She could.
No.
Everybody needs a hobby.
The whole town's been warped by the presence of the movie company.
Why don't you sue me in the world court?
How are you getting on with these fine people?
I want them thrown in jail.
You're going to jail.
I didn't know it was illegal.
Can we just try to keep our pants buttoned and get out of this town in one piece?
Don't. Because I want to tell you something. And I think you know what I mean.
I have a strange relationship with David Mamet in that, like, I discovered him in my university days. I did a stage performance of Glenn Ross, and he's a fun writer to perform. He's, you know, he gives you all these sort of zingers and all these catchphrases, and there's a lot of overplaying, then cutting each other off, and it's exciting to perform. But over the years, I have sort of slowly come to the point that I think that the reason actors are drawn to Mamet so much is because it's fun to perform. Sometimes more so than it is to actually watch. I consider State and Main lesser Mamet for a couple of reasons. First of all, his story of his, you know, initiation into Hollywood, I believe the first 2 screenplays he did was the remake of The Postman Always Rings Twice with Jack Nicholson and Jessica Lange.
Okay.
And The Verdict, which I believe was Oscar nominated.
Yeah. That was a good screenplay.
Yeah, and, you know, he's had hot, cold, and everything in between, but he's been David Mamet for an awfully long time. And this idea that he is the struggling, put-upon writer, right, that like the Philip Seymour Hoffman character plays here in State and Main, you would think that this is who we want to identify with. This is who Mamet is going to most identify with. The story concerns a Hollywood production coming to a small town and corrupting it. Nothing new or anything about that. Where the movie shines is with its dialogue and the Mamet actors from his clubhouse delivering the Mamet dialogue. Mm-hmm. William H. Macy knows what the fuck he's doing. Mm-hmm. Alec Baldwin knows what the fuck he's doing. Mm-hmm. Philip Seymour Hoffman definitely knows what he's doing, and he's in the center of this sort of Mamet-verse thing, but there's not much edge to this movie, especially considering it's David Mamet, and it seems inauthentic to me. Since his experience with Hollywood has been complete success embrace, if anything, David Mamet's the tyrant on any given set. Uh-huh. So I just find it a little disingenuous, this whole thing. And the movie hangs, I think, on a romance between Philip Seymour Hoffman, an amazing actor, mm-hmm. and Rebecca Pidgeon, a human being.
His wife.
Yeah, David Mamet's wife. He was also previously married to Lizzie Krause, and they both did stage work with him, and he basically told them to drain all the emotion out of their acting. And as a result, I don't think either of them are much of an actress. I genuinely feel Lindsay Krause has had her moments, but mm-hmm. I don't know, Rebecca Pidgeon is just icy cold. Like, she played a character in The Spanish Prisoner who
I liked her in that.
Completely ice cold. And in this movie, she's supposed to be playing the heart of the mm-hmm. movie, the heart of this small town. And really, I felt almost no difference in her countenance between the two roles. The romance at the heart of the movie doesn't work. So the heart of the movie doesn't work. So what we have to keep us entertained, as far as I'm concerned, is the Mamet actors delivering the Mamet dialogue. And that does deliver. Like, this is not a negative review. This is me grading on the Mamet curve. Okay? So it's all right. It's like mid-grade, mid-tier Mamet. It's not lazy and just trying to piss people off, but it doesn't really have anything much on its mind, you know? The idea of Hollywood corrupting a small town, or the small town, you know, trading off on Hollywood, is not new. and nothing is particularly interestingly elevated in this particular screenplay. So says myself. But what does Jason Dubray say?
Yeah, and I'm glad you say it's a recommendation, but and it's good to be hard on David Mamet. I mean, at this point he's very experienced. I might argue that he's partially that writer, but he's also partially William H. Macy as the director, and he's a lot David Paymer as that producer. Right. And so I think they're all part of him a bit, and he's kind of doing a spectrum of his Hollywood experience, but at some point he was the low man on the totem pole, but it had been a long time. So I think it maybe is reading into it that he's all Philip Seymour Hoffman, but yeah, Philip Seymour Hoffman's the central character in the piece for sure. I don't think I get what you're saying about Rebecca Pidgeon. I like her more than you do, it sounds like. She's certainly not the screen actor that the A-level members of the cast are, but I went along with it because the other piece is that she's supposed to be, from this, her entire life has been in this small town, which is a bit of a, she'll marry the only guy who's kind of available type of thing, and that her life is set out for her, and she's looking for something more. So she's not as charismatic or as dynamic as some of the other characters, and I get that, but yeah, pairing her with Philip Seymour Hoffman, that
she's in the deep end of the pool. And
but she was also with like Steve Martin in Spanish Prisoner and Campbell Scott, and I liked her in that too. So I don't know if I'm a little bit more forgiving of that performance, which helps.
It might be just too that she's working against a lot of people who have been doing the Mamet thing for a lot more years than she is, and like hell, if I was thrown in the midst of this cast, I would be, a little bit at sea. I think you'd be intimidated.
The charisma of Baldwin there, but the thing I would say is, my thoughts on it is it's very gentle, David Mamet.
Yeah.
This is like Frank Capra
by his standards,
like Frank Capra would have a few less F words, I guess, but this wasn't Glengarry Glen Ross or American Buffalo, which have a real edge and nastiness to them. There isn't that. There are some characters that aren't like the nicest people that you ever meet and are arrogant and that kind of thing, but I found the movie to be charming and cutesy, and this is, if I was to like show a David Mamet piece to to just like somebody who doesn't like darker material, this is maybe the one I think I could show, and people would get enough entertainment out of it. It's not that deep a film,
no,
really,
but it's not confronting. It's not Oleana or Glengarry or anything like that.
No.
It's not going to leave you shaken or angry or anything like that.
No, I mean, good doesn't necessarily triumph over evil. I don't know if this movie would be produced by a studio right now, because in some ways, given like the Me Too movement and everything,
it actually hasn't aged particularly well in a few strengths of the plot. The Alec Baldwin being a pedophile.
Yeah, he likes
14-year-olds.
He likes, like Mamet takes it to that extreme. It isn't, just barely 18.
Macy has that thing. We can't do 14-year-olds. Get him half a 28-year-old, right? Like.
Yeah. That early on, that's not going to read well. No.
Even what's her name from Sex and the City?
Sarah Jessica Parker
getting petitioning for more money for her nudes.
Yeah,
but posing the argument as it being about her artistic integrity and all of this. I believe when State and Main was being made, we were making fun of her, right? Like that sort of attitude, right?
Yeah.
Whereas, having me in your movie and there being nudity in the movie is a big part of the money. So why not? Why not use that as if they're insisting on the nudity?
Yeah.
Why not insist on
and
getting
somehow
a little bit extra?
She'd found, I don't know, between films, religion or something, and that was her objection to it. But then
and a few months later, she'll find something else. And
yes. Yeah.
Everybody, especially the cast, are shallow as piss on a plate, and I get that, and that's fine. And the town starts off kind of sweet, but actually feels like it's slowly getting corrupted by Hollywood.
It is, yeah.
And Hollywood isn't necessarily being, having the same effect on it as the small town is on them. So
I like those two. I don't know who the actors are or where I got them. Those two guys in the coffee shop that are commenting on what's going on. It reminded me of something like out of Robert Altman movie.
Yeah.
Like Cookie's Fortune or something like that. So there are bits that had some charm, and I guess maybe I was in a good mood, and I was happy. Like the other movies we're talking about, heavy and complex and dark, and so this was a little bit of a ray of sunshine, which is bizarre to get a ray of sunshine from David Mamet. But I had enough fun with it. I mean, I certainly have probably. I have a list of criticisms. I have a list of strengths, but it's it did not use your word. I guess fine.
It's fine.
Which it seems like it's a bit of a.
There's so many movies that satirize Hollywood and the Hollywood machine, and that I guess when you see David Mamet's going to take on Hollywood, you expect that the teeth are going to come out, right? You expect that this is just going to be vicious. And it really isn't.
No, it isn't.
If anything else, it's almost like asking to not be taken too seriously. The last line of the movie, Alec Baldwin is being called to set, and he flicks the cigarette away and says, "Beats working."
Yeah.
And that's kind of the vibe of, like, the attitude of the whole movie to me. This was really easy, right? This was really easy. Mamet did not stretch himself. No. The actors were comfortable. Everybody did well. Focusing on Philip Seymour Hoffman, who we're here to talk about.
He's good in this.
He's really good in the movie. He's playing someone whose life is almost strictly internal, which is really hard. And he's the awkward writer, and he had this great script, and everything that they change makes everything worse. And he's trying to tell himself that he's going to be able to stay the ship, and that he's going to keep his. There's a percentage of Barton Fink in him, not as pretentious as Barton Fink, but he started with a script that he really loved, and it's been changed so completely now that it's this other thing. And I believe the love at some point moves from his screenplay to Rebecca Pidgeon. Right?
Yes.
And just the project of her helping him and them bonding becomes the real win for him.
Yeah.
There is no win from the Hollywood system. And we don't know how the movie plays out. We don't know if he wins his Oscar. We don't know how things plan out. If he decides to stay in the small town, or if he drags Rebecca Pidgeon to then we don't need to know.
Yeah. The gotcha, like if you've watched enough David Mamet movies, there's going to be a gotcha moment. I think this was one of the weaker gotcha moments. I think when we think Philip Seymour Hoffman has done this thing, which has gone completely corrupted his morals, but it was all kind of a
misdirection.
Yeah, and it was. I mean, fine, I guess, but it just. I knew to look for it because I've watched enough David Mamet films specifically, and maybe like his plays are a bit different than that. But
I think it was just trying to force more conflict in a movie that really didn't have any beyond big Hollywood coming to small town America. Yeah. But again, I feel like I've been focusing on the negatives. It does have some great lines. What's
associate producer, so somebody that you are trying to like pay off, or you don't respect.
What you give your assistant instead of a raise, and there's just all these lines and aphorisms and old timey wisdom from the town folk. Very Mamet, but without the sort of obtuse, angsty, sort of get under your skin nature that he tends to thrive in. So it's not awful, but he has made much more interesting movies.
Oh, for sure.
It was loud, it was rebellious, and in 1966, the British government banned rock and roll on the radio.
That's the whole point of being the government. If you don't like something, you simply make it illegal.
Until one American DJ...
I don't give a hootenanny about your limey laws.
He's possibly the most famous broadcaster ever.
And a band of renegades...
You must be the Count!
I am he.
Take me to the microphone!
...launched a radio station on the high seas.
We should have set sail years ago.
And raided the airwaves.
Let's have a tune. I'm sick of this silence.
I'm the Count. You're listening to Radio Rock as we count down to ecstasy. Rock on!
Are you doing something dirty?
And that was for Erica.
They had millions of fans.
A nice young man has lost his virginity.
A boat full of treasure.
Busy day.
and the full attention
Pirate Radio
of the authorities.
That will soon be the first person to curse on rock and roll radio. Here it comes.
Shut that filth off! We're going to shut them down.
So I said in the introduction that I'm one of these cold-hearted, cynical bastards who Love Actually makes my teeth hurt. I know people make it like a Christmas tradition. It's got this aw shucks romantic quality, and it's by no means a terrible movie. I'm shocked at its classic status. It seems pretty slight meal as far as I'm concerned. Great cast, slight meal. But this guy has made a bunch of these big comedies in England and Europe or whatever, and high-profile, big cast, Notting Hill, whatever. And I see the technical, tactics that this guy is using to elicit emotion. The Boat That Rocked is one of these based on a true story, where the quotation marks around the based on the true story need to be so, definitely bolded, no, this whole thing is nonsense. There's a crew of people living on this boat doing pirate radio, and we get to know them, we get to like them, we get to see all the fun, romantic misadventures that they have together. And then there's the corrupt government led by Kenneth Branagh, who hates rock and roll, and we don't really get much insight into their world, that they're just humorless, awful, and lame, and they have no fun in their lives. And I would say about a third of this 2-hour movie is montages. It's just there's rock music and montages.
Everybody in UK is dancing to whatever they're playing on pirate radio.
Different people listening to the radio and shaking their booty. I see everything that this movie is doing. I see it and I feel it, but I cannot help but be charmed by it. In the way that Love Actually, and I haven't seen Notting Hill, but I imagine Notting Hill was kind of make me kind of shrug it off. And I kind of got behind just the good vibes that this movie was trying to present. Now, also to be fair, I've been watching a lot of miserable movies. So maybe this was the antidote that I needed. Philip Seymour Hoffman, who's I think the solo American actor in this movie, a lot of great British actors surrounding him, by the way. He definitely brings the heart and soul of the rock and roll. I don't want to say that British people don't know how to rock, but Rhys Ifans plays this sort of competitive other rock DJ, and there's sort of the rowdy American, all right, let's listen to some Aerosmith sort of DJ that Philip Seymour Hoffman represents. And then there's the cool, soothing sort of British take on it. And Philip Seymour Hoffman's just a better DJ, across the board. He brings the rock and the energy. He is the heart of that boat. It's a relative of Lester Bangs in sort of this pirate radio world, and I think he loves that they're doing it, in the open ocean to get away with broadcasting whatever they want to broadcast, and he just loves this and seemingly endless party. But he has this feeling that the party necessarily will have to come to an end. And that's what the movie is all about. And, just like I said, the screenplay is nonsense as far as me believing the nuts and bolts of it. And most of it are the actors just doing behavior while classic rock music plays. And it does have a really good soundtrack. One of the best uses of Leonard Cohen in a movie, which is they use Leonard Cohen too much in movies, but they never use So Long Marianne. And from the beginning of that song, we have a character in a very dark place, and by the time the chorus kicks in, he's already started to heal, just because he's sitting with his buds listening to music. I love that as a premise. So, even though I see the manipulation, and I see that this is just broadly, sort of swept out for us. The tactics are so obvious that it's hard to be impressed at how the movie is laid out. It worked. In the end, I was charmed. I did enjoy watching it. So I have to give it a thumbs up. But, and again, I hate to be so dismissive of romantic comedies, and I don't think you could exactly call this a romantic comedy. But I respect a movie that just wants to put a smile on your face and keep it there. And I think that's mainly what this movie
Maybe
wants.
a broad comedy would be, what to call it. So, one of the things about me, and I still go back to this year where it came out, it wasn't a great year for me for movies, but I actually went with Love Actually as my number one movie for that particular year. I didn't like some of the other Oscar fare that year. I was really picking holes in all kinds of things, and it was a feeling.
Right.
And up until that point, I hadn't been really a Christmassy type of a person.
Right.
But there was something in that movie that awakened whatever, and I was like, I left in such a good space, and subsequent watches, I was able to sort of ignore some of the strange plot contrivances in there. We're not reviewing Love Actually, but I'm just trying to say, like, before that, like, I had Four Weddings and a Funeral. I'm a big fan of his screenplay. Love Actually was the first time he went as director, writer and director. So Pirate Radio, I saw the coming attractions for it, and I was like excited for another Richard Curtis. You know, wasn't sure, like, you know, I know what he does and what his wheelhouse is. The movie seemed to disappear right away, and I hadn't actually watched it until this time.
Oh, wow.
But I was really excited to put it on and check it out and have a good attitude about his style and everything. I had such a miserable time with this movie.
Oh, no.
I'm trying not to get too negative here, but other than the soundtrack and the sheer miracle that Richard Curtis pulled off to have both Kenneth Branagh and Emma Thompson in the same movie, obviously shot at different times, those are the only two impressive things I had with this. Philip Seymour Hoffman, I much prefer as Lester Bangs.
Yeah.
This is, I think, it's not a bad performance. Okay, so don't send in your hate mail. But this was his least interesting character. I thought he could do it in his sleep. There's a lot of him just sitting back and laughing and reacting to all the hijinks on the boat.
Yeah.
Which I wasn't interested in. I wasn't interested in this kid who was this kind of dropped off with his uncle, trying to figure out who his father is, and all that was very convoluted. And they were on this boat, and there's this guy that has been there for months, and they didn't know was there, even though they're they're listening to music all the time, and this guy's playing music every night in the middle of the night. So these aren't people who are 9 to 5 people at all. So I just thought the whole thing was just it's not funny, not interesting. You have Kenneth Branagh, you don't give him much to do. He's a great actor. I know he can play big, and I mean he knew how to play this, and he does it in a serviceable way. But there isn't anything, interest. He's the main villain of the piece, and other than like looking miserable at Christmas dinner and trying to get this other lackey to do his.
He never interacts with the rest of the cast. His whole part of the movie
it's a whole separate thing,
like a separate submarine somewhere else in the world, and it really never really intercepts. He tries to shut them down, but they decide to pursue. They're already a pirate radio station, and they're already in international waters. They're already a pirate radio station.
And again, spoilers for this movie. At the climax, we are led to believe that a major character has died and has drowned. And at no point did I think that happened, but if they had actually killed off that character, you would be getting a kinder review from me right now, because it would actually show that they had, like, at his best, I know he's known for romantic British comedies, but there's always a cynical, dark edge to when Richard Curtis is operating on all cylinders. Four Weddings and a Funeral.
It was dark.
Well, yeah, I mean, like, the biting comments and the way they would talk about different people. And the reason he wrote the movie, because he was sick of going to all of these stupid weddings every weekend. He hates weddings, and he wanted to just kind of rip the whole thing apart, and that was, to me, a genius screenplay. And then Love Actually was, him broadening and telling all of these different stories, some of them sentimental, but there were some moments, like the Alan Rickman subplot in that had some depth to it, and Emma Thompson, who shows up in this for an extended cameo, has a character to play. She's a cartoon in this.
Yeah.
I mean, she shows up as kid's mother, and
I had seen this before, and I'd forgotten that Emma
Thompson
was in the movie.
Yeah.
Now, I love Emma Thompson.
Yes,
so
me too.
that is a difficult thing for me to admit. And I will concede, Jason, that the end of this movie with all of the boats coming out to rescue them and the boats...
The perfect moment. Yeah.
None of this happened. Like,
no.
Clearly none of this happened in, like, the wildest dreams of anybody. I don't know, the movie had, I guess at that point, sort of shown its feathers to me. I kind of knew what it was watching. But yeah, did I really think Philip Seymour Hoffman was going to go down with the ship? No. I think it was kind of silly for them to expect it. And as far as the darkness that you're looking to explore, I think that they hinted at it early with, they basically ferry in women for the DJs to have sex with.
Yeah.
And the one character that Nick Frost plays is being kind of cold, and the all's fair in love and sex and rock and roll.
Yeah, he goes and sleeps with that girl.
Sleeps with the woman who got married the night before and sort of shrugs it off as well. I just did it once, right? No character is really asked to be redeemed or themselves asked for redemption. They just kind of like, yeah, but in the end of the day, we all still like each other for some reason. And I also concede, again, I give the movie a shrugging pass, but I concede a lot of these points. The kid who's on board the boat looking for his father figure seems like, much like I was talking about in State and Maine, that wants to be sort of the beating heart of the picture. And that's the thing that works the least.
It doesn't.
Yeah. And, it just comes to me, I like a lot of these actors. I like Gemma Arterton. She shows up briefly and early in the movie. And I like, is it Chris O'Dowd?
Chris.
The morning DJ who's like really put upon.
He's got some charm to him, I'll admit that. Yeah.
And I don't know. I'm not foaming at the mouth over it. It's okay. Again, it's unusual for me to have this reaction.
Yeah. It's the opposite of what I thought. Yeah.
Because again, typically the schmaltzier you go, especially with the comedy, the more my teeth start to hurt, the more I'm like, yeah, this is sweet and sentimental, but it's nothing real world about it, and it's strangely pretending to be, and there's nothing real about this movie at all, and it's all pretending to be based on a true story. It's just harmless.
Yeah, and I mean, I didn't have high expectations, but I thought it would be kind of like State in Maine for me, a smile and a shrug, and well, that was fun.
Yeah.
I just really didn't have fun, and I'm just coming back from the UK, I guess. Maybe I'm just hypersensitive to, nobody acts that way. You can't get something where, they're trying to show that this was a big phenomenon in the entire, all of the countries of the UK. We're playing it all hours of the night. They have nuns listening to it. It's just, those montages are so stupid. I mean, it's filler for... And
if you don't jive with that, again, the montages of different people listening to the radio and this classic rock, that's a third of the movie. When I said that a third of the movie is montages, I was not being...
It sure is.
It is true. And that is lazy. Nothing screams this is a movie eating the clock more than a montage. And one or two, especially in a movie that spans a lot of time, I'm okay with. But they went to the well a lot. They went to the well a lot.
Yeah. I was looking forward to the end of it, and when I was about 20 minutes in, and that's not a good sign. It went on and on.
So. Well, I don't think we're going to convince each other. But again, first of all, I just like to say, it's not that I hate Love Actually, it's that I don't love it as much as everyone else does. It's it's a harmless movie. There's nothing wrong with it. But for some reason, from the creator of Love Actually, didn't make me go, ooh,
I'm first in line. Yeah,
exactly. So whereas you might have had heightened expectations, I had less.
I didn't expect it to be as good as that, because it's a movie that disappeared 5 minutes after it was released.
Right.
That's rarely a good sign.
And I just watched Capote, and this was sort of like a completely different universe.
Yes, yeah.
To come through,
Have you read the article about the killings in Kansas? I think that's what I want to write about.
Hello, my name is Truman Capote.
I was in Marilyn's apartment just last week. The 4 Matisses hang on her wall. 2 are upside down. Kansas Bureau of Investigation, KBI. But we're not looking for any inside information. I don't care if you catch whoever did this.
I care.
Because since I was a child, folks have thought they had me pegged because of, the way I talk. And they're always wrong. You will be stunned by Perry Smith. Who took care of you as a child?
Orphanage.
It's as if Perry and I grew up in the same house. He stood up and went out the back door, while I went out the front.
Guilty. What is the sentence? Death.
When I think how good my book can be, I can hardly breathe.
He'll be dead by September.
So, Truman Capote, that very specific Truman Capote voice, which sort of like migrated into just sort of the gay voice for a lot of people, as stand-up comedians or whatever. There's something about that, the specificity of the character. He's a real guy. He wasn't putting on a show. This is what he looked like. This is what he sounded like. But there's been a lot of people who are fascinated by the man, and there's been a lot of performances of actors playing the role and sort of embodying Capote. So there's nothing particularly new about like doing a take on this really interesting real life author. But Philip Seymour Hoffman looks and sounds nothing like Truman Capote. Like, not a little bit. I mean, not since they cast, I think, Anthony Hopkins as Nixon, has someone, been asked to play a real life character who just doesn't look like them at all, like, to any significant degree. And yet he embodies Capote so completely that he won his Oscar for it. It's also interesting that it's not, strictly speaking, a biography. This deals with him and the writing of his, basically the creation of the true crime genre in Cold Blood. And his friendship with the author of To Kill a Mockingbird, first of all, as well as his friendship with the two killers, who he interviews repeatedly.
One in particular,
he feels a real kinship with. And again, I guess it has a similar vibe. We were talking about State and Bane, like these journalists descend upon this small town, and it's all changed by the tragedy that takes place. And the people there are originally kind of off-put by Capote, but seem to slowly come to accept him. But I think that the real sort of darkness and heart of the movie, beyond Philip Seymour Hoffman's really impressive performance, is this conceit. At some point he realized that the ending of his book is the execution of these two men. And that on some level, he needs that to happen so that he can finish this book. And that at some level, he wants this to happen for the sake of his book. Now, say what you will about the death penalty. I think that the crimes that these guys did was so cowardly and so evil that I'm not a big supporter of the death penalty, but I get it. In cases like this, I get where people are coming from, right? And especially in the time and place where this took, like, these guys were going to ride the lightning. That was what was going to happen. And I feel like somehow Capote managed to get like 2/3 of the way through this book before that was real to him.
Somehow, yes.
And it's so interesting to play because even though this is one of the most famous writers of his generation, it's another portrait of one of Philip Seymour Hoffman's flawed, broken. It's right, actually, out of his catalog when you look at that. It's just the physicality and the voice affectation that is, impressively and incredibly different. But when you watch the movie, especially when I've seen it a couple of times now, I realized how close this was to Philip Seymour Hoffman and how he might have been able to see, no, this isn't ridiculous casting. In fact, this is kind of interesting. So, big fan of the movie for what it is doing in that way. As a viewer of cinema, this is the kind of movie that as I've been getting older, I've had less draw towards. I am much more into escapist entertainment. Horror, fantasy, sci-fi being my mainstay staples. Whereas I used to just be greedy and want to eat everything. This is a more specific meal to me. And it was the cast and the subject matter that kind of drew me over to this sort of Oscar end of the pool. But it does have that sort of self-importance and that Oscar caliber quality where even the setup, establishing shots seem somehow to have weight and importance in the movie. And there's a calculated sheen to this type of film. And I don't know, especially watching it the second time, as much as I liked it, I felt that it moved slow to me. I felt, I don't know, maybe it was movie fatigue, generally speaking, but there's a 3-hour movie in this. There's a lot of longer, more challenging movies, and for whatever reason, going through it this time, Capote felt like more of a sit than it had in the past. Is it a bad movie? No. Catherine Keener does great supporting work. Clifton Collins Jr., who's
very good in this.
Been around forever, by the way. He shows up in small roles in movies all the time, but he rarely gets something to really sink his teeth in. And oh my God, does he ever get something to really sink his teeth in? Because I don't think even he understands what happened that night. So it's an interesting movie. It's a quality movie. It's a good movie. But again, it's another one of these movies that I feel like everyone likes more than I do. I love Philip Seymour Hoffman, and this got him his Oscar, and you watch the movie and you absolutely understand why. And would I say don't watch Capote? Of course not. It's completely decent, but I'm not foaming at the mouth either. I think it's really good historic filmmaking.
Yeah.
Let's start there.
Yeah, and I'm starting to get what you're saying there about getting older, and I've been Mr. Oscar bait for years, a bit more than genre cinema, and as I'm getting older, I'm leaning a little bit more to what you're describing, where do I want to watch this tonight, or do I want to watch something that is going to just entertain me and is not as challenging? I think at one point you said that every movie in some way is a horror movie.
Sometimes.
And like some of those establishing shots, and when we see the actual murders take place, I mean, it there's a brutality and there's a kind of a coldness to this film. Shout out to Canada as well. Winnipeg is where they shot it. It's supposed to be Kansas in the film, but I was focused on that a lot more. I didn't know that when I watched it in theaters years ago. But looking at this list, I waited a bit to watch it because I was afraid that, because I loved it when I saw it in theaters at a different point in my life, and I thought, well, I don't want to see its diminishing returns on a subsequent viewing. And it didn't, actually. Like once I got into it early on, I thought, okay, Philip Seymour Hoffman with the voice, this is, and he was executive producer for the movie, so this is like, give me my Oscar now type of thing, which I sometimes get. But once I got more into the story, I forgot about it. The best parts of his performance are actually the things he does non-verbally when he's reacting and seeing something that is changing his world. It is mesmerizing. It's a very good performance. I know Catherine Keener got a nomination for playing Harper Lee. Yeah. And has some, like, is one of the few people who can actually challenge Capote in the movie, and so their scenes together are very good, but they're also well written. And so nothing against her nomination, but Clifton Collins Jr. didn't get a nomination, and he, other than Hoffman, his performance this time around was staggeringly good.
Chris Cooper's really good too, but Cooper's always good, and he's kind of a more minor role to the movie for me.
Yeah, the movie he won an Oscar for is actually one of my least favorite of his performances in adaptation. But yeah,
I thought he was really good in that movie too. But he was good in the new Muppet movie. He's just good.
Yeah, he does.
he's good.
He wakes up good. So
I think Harper Lee is good in the movie in that it sort of humanizes and normalizes. Like, this is sort of what he's around someone he sees as an equal, how he kind of interacts with them. Because he is a little bit intimidated when he's in the prison, and he is a little bit cautious when he's dealing with the police and the higher members of the community. So we get to see the difference in how he behaves with someone when he's comfortable and then when he's not. But honestly, beyond that, I don't know what the Harper Lee angle adds to this particular storyline, other than we get to see Catherine Keener play.
Well, and there's some piece, again, I think it's a well-written movie in the sense that when she has her moment of triumph, like, she's basically going along as his assistant, and because she can talk to the teenage girl who discovered the bodies. When he tries to, it's a really really awkward. And even that conversation they have is really where he's trying to project some of what's one of the family members experienced to his own life, which he does a lot with Clifton Collins as well in the film. But that moment when they're at the To Kill a Mockingbird premiere, and this is like the height of her book, little book or whatever, and nobody could get the title right when they were talking in the New York elite or whatever, and then it's become this big movie starring Gregory Peck. They're at the premiere, and Capote is miserable, and he gets drunk, and she goes to talk to him, and he just complains about his life, and they got a stay of execution, and he can't finish his novel, blah blah blah. And she says, "So what did you think of the movie?" And he doesn't really respond. He responds late after she's left. He's like, "Well, okay, have a good night there," and walks away. He can't ignore. He's so focused on himself.
Yeah.
And I think some people can misread. And the first time I remember the first time I saw it, a problem I had was in the climax where the hangings happen, and we're seeing these guys killed, and we see this like for your consideration reaction shot from Philip Seymour Hoffman, tears coming down his eyes. But I kept thinking this is very disingenuous because he wanted, as you said, he wanted this to happen initially so he could get more story. He found a lawyer for them for appeals, but then they begged him to find a lawyer for the Supreme Court appeal, and he ignores them and then says, after exhaustive search, I can't find a lawyer. He did no such exhaustive search. He just wants his book to be done.
And they are guilty, is the thing.
Yeah, they for sure. But I just didn't buy, and maybe there's something more complex going on that I need to watch it yet again. But I just thought it felt like that's one of the rare moments in there. I think it's well directed by Bennett Miller. He got a Best Director nomination. It got a Best Picture nomination. It was up for a lot of stuff. But the writing was probably better than the direction. Just focusing on that moment a bit, and when he breaks down when he's having that last conversation with them, I think it's still about himself.
I did everything I could. This is something that is happening to me. Not to...
And that's how he treats everybody.
Yeah.
And those party scenes, which feel a little bit like filler, are really important because he wants to be the center of attention at all of these parties and all of these events. This is who this guy is. The pacing thing is interesting because I thought it was going to be a slow-paced experience. Maybe it was the right day, right time. I didn't notice the pace as being a problem, whereas Pirate Radio couldn't end fast enough. And there's another one we're going to be talking about that, honest to goodness, when we went into this show, I remembered it being a 3-hour movie, and it's a 2-hour movie, and that didn't change on my subsequent watch of it. So this one didn't feel that slow and that whatever to me. So I think I like it more than you do, but I don't think we're too far apart on this. So
there's something, again, I feel like a hypocrite, but like because all movies, especially when you watch as many as we do, you sort of see the tactics or the things that they're doing. This is the moment. That scene where he has his breakdown in front of them in the jail cell is the Oscar moment.
Yes, it is.
Of the movie, and it feels like it. And I think it feels like, because nothing else in the movie feels like that Oscar moment. And it's interesting because in the special features, they talk about it, that scene. And Philip Seymour Hoffman didn't want to cry. He was sort of talked into it by the director.
Oh, so the director's choice. I didn't know that.
He kind of got there, and he found a way to make it work for himself in the performance. And that's, of course, the take that they used. But it's that calculation that sometimes part of me resents a little bit. And it's just, I mean, if that's what the director wanted, do what the director wanted, for sure. But that the director felt that Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance wasn't so convincing and transformative already that this Oscar quote was required. Like, it was needed for the movie.
Bit of over-direction, I would say. Like, to me, the performance, and I actually wouldn't have voted for him even though I admired the performance. I was kind of a Heath Ledger in Brokeback Mountain on that camp that year. But the scene I would go to is when he sneaks into the funeral home and he opens the caskets and looks at the bodies of the dead family and realizes and like he's not doing the voice or anything. It's just a reaction shot, and it's brilliant. I would give him the award for those scenes and those moments, or even that scene I just described with Catherine Keener at the premiere.
Yeah.
Those are the best parts of it. And yeah, you're right. We didn't need big music type of tearful ending.
I do like in the movie's defense too that it doesn't try to make Capote perfect. He is flawed. He is narcissistic. He was born wealthy and talented. He was like a published author before he was 20.
Yes.
And in the highest echelons of the culture and circles, and wealthy and respected from a very young age, and none of it was fucking good enough, right? Like honestly, I think that I probably would have a hard time getting along with such a personality in the real world. But it's really interesting watching a movie about it.
Yeah. I like it a lot. It's going to rank high.
I'm just a little person, one person in a sea of many little...
mit dir über deine Homosexualität sprechen.
I'm not a homosexual.
Gesagt wurde, es heißt abstrakt.
Somewhere, maybe someday.
I don't know why I make it so complicated.
That's what you do.
I
help you through any way I can.
Somewhere, maybe
There are millions of people in the world, and none of those people is an extra. They're all leads of their own stories.
Person, and we'll go out and play.
Caden? What? When are we gonna get an audience in here? It's been 17 years.
Say thank you.
Thank you.
You're very welcome, young lady.
So I was an epic fan of Charlie Kaufman. I still am a fan of Charlie Kaufman, but I wouldn't say I'm an epic fan of Charlie Kaufman. He did a run of movies working with Spike Jonze and Michel Gondry, right? Being John Malkovich, Human Nature, Adaptation, and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. And he also did the screenplay for Confessions of a Dangerous Mind.
Yeah.
And so with that particular track record, I'm just fascinated. What's this guy going to do? What's he going to bring next? And now he's directing. This is his directorial debut. Synecdoche or Synecdoche, New York, depending on who says the title. And as I was a huge fan of Kaufman going in, I always felt like they were hard to get your head around, but they were funny, they were imaginative, and they felt solvable. They felt like, as you're thinking about it, like all the pieces of Being John Malkovich are disparate, but there is a unit there. There is a theme. There is a trajectory that a character follows. There is something for the audience to take from the movie. Synecdoche, New York was the first time where that absolutely did not happen for me. The idea is like he wants to put dream logic into a world that has real life stakes. So he still has his real interesting, bizarre Charlie Kaufmanisms throughout the film. And the main character, Caden, is given this, like, I guess, limitless funding to do an art project of whatever he wants. And he finds a huge warehouse in New York in which he makes another New York. And then within that warehouse, he builds another warehouse where within that warehouse is contained yet another New York. And he wants to make this important art piece. And it studies his entire life with focus on the women in his life, particularly his romantic relationships and his daughter, most specifically. But men don't seem to win place or show a lot for him as far as being important in his life, with the exception of the Tom Noonan character, which is one of the threads of the movie that I actually genuinely liked. But the thing that I found and continue to find frustrating about Synecdoche, New York, is that, or Synecdoche, however the hell you want to say it, is its obtuseness. Its obtuseness goes right to the title. I don't know what this means. And I don't think Philip Seymour Hoffman knows what this means. And I don't think Charlie fucking Kaufman knows what this means. And I've seen a lot of video essays, because I admit I did some research trying to get me some help to like cracking the code in this movie, because it could really be like there's some key to it that I was missing, that once I see that angle, oh, why, like the veil is suddenly lifted, the smoke clears. And I'm not necessarily looking for clarity in a Charlie Kaufman movie, but like I'm usually energized and excited by it, and Synecdoche frustrated me. And I keep going back to it. It's one of these movies, like I've said about Natural Born Killers, where I keep going back to it, trying to crack it, and saying, this time I'm going to get it. Because there are concepts that I really love. Like the idea that this woman's buying a house, and the real estate agent is giving her all the pluses and minuses, and she's like, I am a little bit concerned about dying in the fire. Because the house is on fire. It's smoldering as she's buying it. And we see her grow old in this house, and the fire progresses. It's like, and I think intellectually, like the idea of like committing to something that you know is a bad idea on some level, like there is some philosophical meat to that, and it's absurd, and but I don't know how the movie wants us to take it. Are we supposed to question her for this decision? What does it mean? We get Catherine Keener back again, so we have sort of a Philip Seymour Hoffman, Catherine Keener double feature here. And I do like her energy in the movie, as I seem to always like the energy.
She disappears from the movie pretty fast.
She's, I think, the thing that breaks his heart,
yeah,
that wounds him, that makes him want to express this. But what does he want to express? And does he express it? The movie is interesting, but frustrating. And it sprawls, and it's idea to idea, scene to scene, and the more I watch it, the more distant I feel from it. It's kind of frustrating. Kaufman made another movie after this called Anomalisa, and he did it with puppets, and I think that helped him in a lot of ways. The characters were still frustrating and selfish and whatever, but that it was putting it in like a physically different universe. Somehow he has pushed the weird so far that it's no longer fun. It's just obtuse. I thought I was going to get yelled at for that, but this is where I started the movie. I find it interesting, but I find it equally frustrating. That's where I started.
Yeah. I would... Maybe, I don't know if this is an odd comparison or not. This feels like a movie I'm supposed to like, much like Sergio Leone's Once Upon a Time in America.
Right.
People regularly tell me, what a great movie, one of the great movies of all time.
People who like this movie like it a fucking lot.
They do. You know, I've talked to some people as among their favorite, or if not their absolute favorite movie. And I'm always willing to go back and give it another try. The first time I saw it, I guess I don't worship at the altar of Charlie Kaufman as much as some people. I see the chinks in the armor with his screenplays, but they're always creative, they're always inventive. But I think the key was, and because he's earned so much clout, he basically had a blank check to make this movie, and he could have anybody he wants, which not a lot of people at their directorial debut get.
Yeah.
But I think when he gives his screenplay to another person to direct, it's more focused. It's going to be ultimately a better film. But the first time I watched, it felt like it went on and on and on. Like, how much time does Diane Wiest narrate?
I love Diane Wiest.
I love her too.
love Diane Wiest.
And they gave her a little bit more to do, because initially I was like, okay, she's cast as this New York actor to play the cleaning lady or whatever outside of his ex-wife's apartment, and then she volunteers to be the next Tom Noonan late in the film, which again, it's kind of brings a smile to my face. It's ridiculous, but she's obviously older than Philip Seymour Hoffman's character, and yet we're hearing her narrate the last, whatever section of his life. And like, where is she? Where is this going on? And it's tough for me because it seems like it's it's hyper real because of all the like the family stuff that they have at the very beginning of the film, but then they start. There's these little touches, like all these commercials with Philip Seymour Hoffman's character in them, hints that we're going into the bizarro world, but most of it's the bizarro world, but they're still trying to ground some things in reality, and I never quite got on board. If we're going like full Malkovich or something like that, then I can get behind that a little bit more.
I didn't always understand Malkovich, but I usually had a bizarre smile on my face.
Yeah.
I laughed during
even
it.
the parts I didn't like as much. I appreciated the vision and the creativity, but again, Spike Jonze I think is a better director than Charlie Kaufman.
Yeah.
I don't think many people would argue with me on that one. But yeah, I just ultimately had the frustration you expressed. It's a mild thumbs up review. So again, this is maybe my state in Maine where I'm sounding super negative on it.
Right.
Its best qualities are, to me, the cast. The performances, I mentioned Wiest late in the film. I kind of, that section, I liked it, even though it felt like it went on and on with her bit there. But Samantha Morden is an actor I really like, and it's been interesting to see her career moving into like The Walking Dead and different things. Like that's not necessarily...
She's great in The Walking Dead.
Like we talked about Sweet and Low Down, where she was so sweet and whatever, and there's a little bit of that sweetness in this character here. But she plays an American very well. I liked her Emily Watson too, as this playing a different version of her, and when they go to that funeral, and then like the whole lead up to the sex scene and all that. Like there's some really great supporting performances in here.
Jennifer Jason Leigh.
Yeah, I love Jennifer Jason Leigh. Mm-hmm. I didn't care for her in this at all. I liked her more in Amalisa.
Just as a presence, though,
but you can get her to just be in a few scenes in this thing. Yeah. This guy can have anybody he wants in this film, just because of who he is.
Well, I'll tell you the truth. If Charlie Kaufman asked me to be in his movie, I will be in his movie.
Well, me too, of course. But at the same time, like. And again, it's a big cast, and the movie's already kind of bulky. But I just wanted. I thought some of the actors got full-fledged characters and interesting things to do. Other people just happen to be there. Like basically, Jennifer Jason Leigh is a German accent and is this artist, and she's kind of a two-dimensional, and she's the one who corrupts the daughter.
But for some reason, we focused on her briefly. The movie seems very focused on the female characters in Caden's life. Like I said at the beginning, like most of the supporting roles. Talking about things that I can latch onto and that I liked. Tom Noonan. We've talked about the actor before. This really tall, gaunt guy. He was in Manhunter and everything like this. He briefly became the voice of myself as a frustrated audience member to Caden when he was like, "You need to see you, and I've been studying you, and I can show you what you are, so you can see it, and you can process it, and you can." And Caden doesn't seem to respond to that. Like, this is all his vision. He doesn't want to be told anything. He wants to tell people what the vision is. And it's so interesting how you can see everybody else's flaws so clearly, but not your own. And somehow the Tom Noonan character is trying to make him have this confrontation. And again, this is just me trying to solve the riddle, because this is what the movie is, a series of unanswered riddles, right?
The bit goes on too long, though.
But,
I got tired of his presence in the film, unfortunately. I mean, I see the potential in that idea, but...
You need to see yourself in order to make this great art, and he refuses to see himself, so he can't make great art. No matter how much the budget, or 20 years or something like this that he spends without an audience.
And I'm not sure who can afford to be...
Again,
they give up their lives for this guy, and maybe some comment on the artist. And
but again, I think that maybe just fundamentally the basic premise doesn't work. Like, he wanted to have dream logic in a real world stakes, and you can't have your cake and eat it too in that measure. Either what happens within the dome matters or it doesn't. Either we're supposed to take this world at face value, or we're not. Artifice on top of artifice on top of artifice, but it was always, from frame one, dreamlike and ridiculous. It feels like David Lynch.
Well, I was going to say, and I would have called bullshit on you if you hadn't have been critical of this movie, because I have the same thought on this one, that it's messing with its audience but doesn't actually provide any answers, which for some reason I forgive Lynch, and I kind of am having a better time with most of his work. Inland Empire, not so much, but this is a 2-hour movie that felt like 4 hours to me watching it. And
if you don't have any answers, you don't have to tell us the answers even, but if you don't have any answers, I think that is creatively counterfeit. That is my problem with David Lynch, and that is my problem with this film. I think I had so much respect and got so much out of even the weaker thing, even Human Nature, which isn't a great movie. I just it was so original and different that I have a lot of respect for it. It took a swing. I knew what it was trying to do, what it was trying to say. And I think if I knew what this was trying to do and trying to say, I could at least say, interesting failure, right? But the fact that I don't even know what he was trying to say at the end of the day, that feels closer to just a straight failure. But big swings. I do have a certain degree of
respect. It's a risky film, yeah.
You're in a position where you can make any film you want. So you could do a safe thing. You could make a movie that's going to win you more Oscars. Or you could do something absolutely, completely original and creative. And he did that. It just didn't work 100%.
And this had Oscar talk when it came out. He won prizes for Best New Film Director, and it didn't kind of turn into anything, but...
I think there's a bit of percentage of smoke, and again, I'm sorry, I'm always so shitty. I feel similar about David Lynch, and when people talk about David Lynch movies and how brilliant they are, right? I don't know. I think this was undisciplined.
Yeah, but he needed somebody to tell him no, and Spike Jonze was a producer on it, so he obviously supported this project, but he wasn't directing this thing.
And who's going to deliver a Philip Kaufman script better than Philip Kaufman, right? It makes sense. Or Charlie Kaufman.
Charlie Kaufman, yeah.
Pardon me, Charlie Kaufman. But who's going to do better than he? So, I feel like he earned this opportunity, but he didn't slam dunk it, unfortunately.
No, sadly.
How'd I get down here?
You're acting aggressive because you drank too much alcohol.
What do you do?
I am a writer, a doctor, a nuclear physicist, a theoretical philosopher. But above all, I am a man, just like you.
He's been writing all night. You seem to inspire something in him.
What we will do now will urge you toward existence within a group, society of family.
Good science, by definition, allows for more than one opinion. Otherwise, you merely have the will of one man, which is the basis of cult.
And this is where we are at. To have to explain ourselves. For what? The only way to defend ourselves is to attack.
You should wake up, Val. Your father's speaking. You might learn something.
He's making all this up as he goes along. You don't see that?
So, Paul Thomas Anderson, he's made a couple of watchable movies, I guess, in his life. I used to give him a hard time, or we've talked about it in the past, where I feel like until he made There Will Be Blood, he was sort of a, not exactly copy-paste director, but his influences were very much worn on his sleeve. But after There Will Be Blood and then this one, The Master, I can't really compare either of those movies to anything. These are Paul Thomas Anderson movies, and hooray for that. Even though ostensibly the main character of The Master is Freddie Quill, the Joaquin Phoenix character, we start with him, we anchor with him, we see him being taken in. This is Philip Seymour Hoffman's movie. It's still somehow, it's Scientology, but it's not. It's being sort of safe about this cult thing. But what the movie establishes with Joaquin at the beginning is this broken, clearly PTSD, naval soldier floundering in a world outside of war. He's not able to keep a job. His behavior is strangely childish and impulsive. His behavior around women isn't particularly great. And he is, like so many people, a lost soul looking for answers. And he stumbles upon the cause. And he gets sucked into it. You and I did an entire episode on cults. So it was a pretty good episode, I think. And I talked about in one of them, I think it was The Sound of My Voice, how when they do these programming scenes or these vetting scenes, or the E-meter as they would call it in the Scientology, it starts to remind me of theater work back in my university days.
Me
when
too,
we're doing
yeah.
like intense scene work or absurdist scene work, or where you're locking in on another person and you're really staring them down in the soul in the way you would never do another person in the real world unless you were in high stakes drama with them. And the energy of that is palpable in the room. It's something that you can feel even if you're not in the scene, even if you're just watching the scene. It's energizing. And the scenes between Philip Seymour Hoffman and Joaquin Phoenix when he is working the cause, the system
Processing,
thank you, are fucking hypnotizing. They are just so intense and great to watch. And you see Freddie Quill's commitment. You see him decide to commit, and once he decides to commit, like, he is basically all in. Like, he is impressed by this guy, and he needs answers, and he does find comfort in the cause. All of this is very interesting. But it's interesting how the movie doesn't seem to function like a typical narrative film
not
in
at all.
any way. We span a large period of time, but the thread of the narrative is kind of strange. We just jump from moment to moment, scene to scene, from piece of information to piece of information. And we see Freddy start to get better, and we see Freddy start to get worse, and we see him eventually divorcing himself from the cult. Let's call it what it is. So I want to get to the elephant in the room. We just talked about Synecdoche, New York, and what does it all mean? I mean, I think you could say it's an examination of what draws people into cults and how difficult it is to get out of it once you're in it. And I think that alone would be enough. But I want to take you on a slow boat to China. What the hell happened in the third act of this movie? I cannot decide if it's brilliant or if it's honestly the screenwriter just throwing his hands up in the air, painting himself in a corner, and he doesn't have a way out. So Philip Seymour Hoffman starts to sing. And I would be less irritated by this, but we've had this fucking conversation before, Jason. I remember a little motion picture called Magnolia, where everybody starts inexplicably singing. And me thinking that was kind of a sour note in that movie. I don't think it's a sour note in this movie in the same way, but I will confess to being completely confounded by it. Do I like the movie? Yes, I do. I think it's fascinating to watch. But I do think it is a challenging picture. It's long. It's not easy on the viewer. It doesn't play tactically. It doesn't sort of help you along in your understanding. It's just bear witness. There's a lot to respect here, especially in the performances, but it's a mixed feeling I end up with.
Yeah. I watched this, and my dad was in the room, and he watched it too, and at the end his comment was, what a weird movie. And
fair.
And it is a weird movie. I'll give you a hint, and then a big thing on my podcast and on this, what I want to do is a balanced perspective. If it's a movie I love, I want to have some criticisms of it. If it's a movie I really dislike, like Pirate Radio, I still want to say I enjoyed the music and a couple things here and there to try to have a more fleshed out review. Doing my notes and looking over my notes for this, to give you a hint, I had nothing under weaknesses.
Okay.
Nothing. It's a puzzle, but unlike the previous movie, I think it's a solvable puzzle. And I've noticed this with his films, like from There Will Be Blood on, he is expecting his viewer to think about even Licorice Pizza, which is a lot lighter, about what's gone on and put a few things together and what was this about. But Licorice Pizza has that episodic nature to it as well, which I think is a fantastic film. Yeah, I've established I'm a fan of Paul Thomas Anderson. And I actually think one of my least favorite of his movies is one you like quite a bit more than I do, but Punch Drunk Love. But at that same time, that's an interesting movie, and it's one thought-provoking. Watching it this time, I was really excited to talk about it. I picked up on some different, because all the cult stuff and those scenes you talked about with the processing and going back to like doing Meisner exercises at the University of Saskatchewan and like the methody type of stuff that they would do. I just loved all that, and I was thinking to myself, yeah, this is a veiled Scientology. I can see why so many actors are attracted to this particular cult. If that's what it's about, and trying to get to, the truth about who you are, and that's how it's sold in many ways, even though the truth is that you've lived through all these lifetimes and are millions or billions of years old, and all of these kind of absurd pieces in there. But I this time around, I was watching that third act, which I think you're wrestling with a bit, and I think possibly the message here is that you need to be your own master, and the journey for Joaquin Phoenix's character is he then becomes his own master by breaking off from Philip Seymour Hoffman, basically playing L. Ron Hubbard, who had become his master. Because everything that Hoffman tells him to do, he does. We have, speaking of a montage sequence, when the indoctrination happens quite intensely, and he spends, what would that have been, a day or two just walking to one end of the room, the other, and saying what he feels on a window and then on a wall, and we see for a long time, and he gets to a point where he relies so much on this man, and he's been kind of throughout the film looking for that. But when he breaks away, when he makes that decision to drive off in the motorcycle, and then he goes and he actually faces his trauma with this girl that he never went back to see in his hometown due to his PTSD and everything
and
after the war.
She's not waiting for him.
No.
Yes.
No. And then he decides kind of to live his own life. And I think that was like the step. I'm not sure that this guy isn't right at the end of the movie, but he's on probably a better course moving forward than he was certainly at the beginning, when we see he's going from situation to situation, and he's described as an animal, and Phoenix is so good at playing that.
He's violent, impulsive, sexual, gruff.
I want to talk about the sexuality also for a moment too, because what's interesting, if you follow the entire film, he's regularly trying to have sex. Whether it's members of of the cult, or that when he's a photographer in the department store.
That was a cringy scene.
Yeah, but then he falls asleep on their date or whatever. And it seems like a really gratuitous sex scene at the end of the film, but that's actually the first time that he has sex in the film. He's finally released whatever it is, that this tension within himself, and found a woman that's interested in him that he can move forward with. And maybe that's what he needed, not all of this other stuff that he has gone through in the
real or
film.
Symbolic release. And
yes.
There is no release from the cause. You are sucked in, and then you are there.
Yeah.
My take on it is slightly different. I guess I took more literally that Philip Seymour Hoffman thing. Everybody has a master. You just have to choose which master you follow.
He says it, yeah.
He also, Philip Seymour Hoffman, is led by his wife. Amy Adams kind of
she's the power, yeah.
Quietly rules him.
Yeah.
And
she's good in the movie. Different role for her, for sure.
Yep. It was I thought that was well played and interesting. Like, she is the power, but she's the power quietly. In order to maintain the power, she lets him think that he is the power. And that I thought was great. But yes, on some level, Philip Seymour Hoffman understands this, but as long as he gets to be the master, he's happy to play that role. But yeah, that was sort of my take. Everybody needs to, but choose your master carefully, I guess, is more the idea. But like I said, the idea of why you would be seeking these kinds of answers and how you would be susceptible to the cult, absolutely.
You can see how it would work, yeah.
The slow rot and seeing how, some of the smiles in this cult are increasingly fake. Having the master's son tell you that he just made this shit up.
Yeah.
Which
Jesse Plemons, who's
great actor.
Yeah,
and that was the scene that cost Paul Thomas Anderson his relationship with Tom Cruise, apparently.
I was going to get into that a little bit, yeah.
He showed him the movie before it
did he really?
released. And apparently he was okay with most of it, but the scene with Jesse Plemons, because that is ripped directly from Scientology. L. Ron Hubbard's son said L. Ron Hubbard made all of this shit up, flipped Tom Cruise's switch, and he was yelling. He was not happy about it. I don't know that they're not talking, but I know, Tom Cruise takes his faith very fucking seriously.
He does.
So, they haven't worked again since, I don't think.
No, they only worked on Magnolia. Now, I had a slightly more insidious take on things. I don't know. It's completely factless. It's just my theory was...
I do that all the time.
Yes. My theory was, Anderson had this movie in mind a while ago. He cast Tom Cruise in Magnolia, and because Philip Seymour Hoffman was in one of the Mission Impossible movies as well, the two of them together, because he was really a muse for Paul Thomas Anderson, and now he's using Cooper Hoffman in his movie, so there's a connection there. But the two of them went along with Cruise for some of the processing through Scientology as research for this film, knowing all along they were going to make this movie.
Yeah.
And so they were kind of using Cruise and that experience. Now that's my theory. I don't know. I'm completely...
Very easy to believe, though. Very easy to believe. And that angle is very interesting and does work for the movie. And the movie gets a thumbs up review. But is it a 4-star or a 5-star review? Well, I really wish I could, be more comfortable with the end of this movie. Does that make sense to you? Does it just seem like he has run out of things to sell, Joaquin Phoenix on? He doesn't know what more to say, and this is his absolutely desperate Hail Mary pass. I have no idea. This is me just trying to solve it, because I do not understand that choice. I will choose to respect it, but I don't understand it.
Yeah. I think, and it's hinted earlier on when they're having that family meeting, and there's hypocrisy in that family meeting about what a problem Phoenix is. And they all want to sort of be rid of him, but Hoffman wants to work harder, and we cannot give up on this guy. And then he puts so much of his energy and time into him, and still it doesn't work, right? And so when he comes back, it's just there's too many other people in the many universes that I have to save. I can't do this again. But it is interesting, that scene that is Amy Adams who gives the goodbye.
Yeah.
Why are you here? You're drinking. You've always been the same.
Yeah.
You're not going to change. But I still think, he wishes that he could still work with him, if it was his choice. But it's become his wife's choice.
Yeah.
And we have moments where he's singing already in the movie. We have that interesting, and again, it goes back to the this lust and this animalistic, sex obsession that Joaquin Phoenix has, where we're watching this scene where everybody presumably would be clothed, and
he's fantasizing that everyone's naked.
Every woman is naked. Yeah. All the men are dressed.
That's
you
right.
see, but every woman is naked in there, and that's what's on his mind. He can't stop drinking. He can't stop thinking about sex, and no matter how much programming they do,
that's still there.
But I was wowed when I saw this in the movie theater. High on my top 10 list. It still is. I would have a tough time if we did a rank of Paul Thomas Anderson movies. It would rank very high. I would have trouble where to go, because I've loved so many of his films, everything from the Master on, to me, has been a modern day classic. So
absolutely worth watching anything
Yeah.
that he puts his name on. I don't always think he hits it out of the park, but it's never been not worth my time.
And maybe a controversial statement, particularly with Joker and some other performances under his belt, but this is my favorite Joaquin Phoenix performance.
He's really good.
I this is the one I kind of thought he, as much as I was happy he won for Joker as well, but I think he could have won for this.
The specificity to the performance too. He got some plate put in his mouth,
Yeah.
so it would clench his teeth, and so he only talks out of the one side of his face for the whole movie, and he really commits to it. But there's something about that that's sort of, it's a physical affectation, but it bespeaks something internal being deeply off about him.
The physicality of the character, how he walks, and knowing how method Phoenix is.
Yeah.
Like we know he goes there, and everything that we see on screen he is doing, watching him and Philip Seymour Hoffman, I would pay any money to see those two. If it was just watching those processing scenes for 2-3 hours, it was just that.
Honestly,
I would pay for that.
Those scenes are worth the price of admission alone.
They're
for
so
me.
good.
Like, not that the rest of the movie doesn't have a lot to it, but those scenes are just
the intensity of it, like Phoenix's facial expressions and
slapping himself.
Well, yeah, and where he has to keep his eyes open when he's
Yeah.
answering the questions.
Yeah,
that is such a great scene, and well written, well directed, and I'm a huge fan of this movie. Not a big surprise to you, I'm sure.
So it's a puzzle, but it's worth puzzling over.
I think it is.
And unlike another movie we talked about,
Yeah.
I do think it's solvable. Yeah.
Dear Mr. Horowitz, I am 8 years old. I have a rooster called Ethel. It would be great if you could write back and be my friend.
Dear Mary, thank you for the letter. I have never met anyone from Australia. I share my home with a fish, a parakeet, an invisible friend called Mr. Ravioli. People often confuse me. I have trouble understanding them. Maybe this is why I don't have any friends.
Dear Max, in your letter you said you had no friends. Neither do I. Can you help me?
Dear Mary, do you like chocolate hot dogs?
Where do babies come from in America? Do they come from cola cans? Have you got a girlfriend, Max? Can you explain love? Beat it, creep!
I find the world very confusing and chaotic.
Dear Max, I don't think my parents like you.
People often think I am tactless and rude. I cannot understand how being honest can be improper. You are my best friend, my only friend.
All right, Mary and Max. This is a stop-motion animated film from Australia, and voice talent of Toni Collette, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Eric Bana. And I'm going to admit that this movie kind of hits me in specific feels areas. I love the method of stop motion, the clay figures being moved a frame at a time and photographed. It's such a meticulous and beautiful and specific type of animation. I have a soft spot for it. I like lame stop motion animation just because I like that sort of style of animation. I like movies that are talking to kids that are about growing up, which this very much is. And I like movies that don't talk down to kids. And the main character is a 44-year-old Jewish man who suffers from Asperger's, who's having a pen pal relationship with a 9-year-old girl. Well, when they start, she's 9 and he's 44. But
and she starts at
She writes a random letter that she picks an address out of the New York phone book to ask some questions to an American that she has about being lonely and about what it's like there, and some confirmation. She doesn't have a dad and her mom's a drunk. She lives a very dark childhood. Anyway, so she just randomly sends this letter, and it arrives in this guy's mailbox, and he has such a private, personal, compartmentalized, necessarily controlled existence that even this letter from a little girl really throws him for a loop. It's actually interesting how one side of the letters being exchanged the little girl is excited and enthusiastic and can't wait for the next letter and can't wait to write the next one. But for him, as much as this is a great thing for him, this relationship might be one of the most true and important relationships he has in his life. It's incredibly stressful. Every question she asks has the weight of life or death to him. And one letter actually commits him to the hospital for 8 months. It's an incredibly fragile thing. They're dealing with the horrors of being a child and being in a terrible situation and not knowing it because you're a child, and the horrors of being an adult and in a terrible situation but not knowing it because of your mental illness, and how these two people connect from the other side of the world. And not to spill my hand cards, I just think it's absolutely beautiful, and I think it's unsung. Like, nobody talks about this movie. And it's rated G, and I honestly think it should be rated PG.
Yeah, at least.
There's adult content, grown-up things happen, consequences happen, and it's not a fairy tale, you know? The little girl grows up to write a book about this guy, and it doesn't bring them closer, and it doesn't bring her riches. The little girl spends her childhood obsessed with the boy across the street, and it's not a mutual thing. No. And it's deep and dark and complex, and it's for kids, ? But I think it's amazing. I really, really liked it. I was moved by it, and I was moved by it the first time I saw it. I watched it again for this this list with all these complicated, big, 3-hour, bold, epic, ambitious movies. This is the one that rang tears for me.
Oh, really? Okay.
But again, something very specific about this hits me. I could identify with the little girl, and I could identify with the old man. And the old man, as voiced by Philip Seymour Hoffman, sounds nothing like Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Not at all.
And it's a completely realized character. And when I say, like, yeah, it's just a voice performance. Why are we talking about a voice performance in this tribute to Philip Seymour Hoffman? Because it's amazing. So I'm a big fan of Mary and Max.
Yeah, I was afraid of that. Okay, so I'll start off with, for whatever reason, and I've been trying to work on this, animation has me at a distance. Okay. I think it's a harder sell for me as a viewer. Other than like Studio Ghibli films are fantastic, and a lot of Disney films still have that sentimentality. I mean, not a lot of the recent ones as much. You know, I haven't watched a lot of these ones that they always talk about, but the 2D, like the drawn animation, I like and I'm impressed with visually stop motion.
Right.
But I can't say that there's one that's, you know, oh, this is the movie that, you know, this is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Have you seen My Life as a Zucchini?
No, I haven't. But maybe I need to check it out.
I love this medium.
Yeah, I can see why.
I love adult stories for kids. It is really a soft spot for me. Sorry, please.
Yeah. And so I thought, okay, this will potentially feel like homework to me. Sadly, it was homework for me. It was the last one of the 6 that I watched here. And so I thought, okay, maybe it's not for me. And we've talked about this before, about reviewing the film and think about, okay, who it's for, what's the intention, and is it successful? And I thought, okay, well, it is for kids. And so kids are going to enjoy it. But as we got more and more into the film, I wasn't completely convinced that it was for kids. It might be for kind of, if they were willing to watch it pre-adolescent, or maybe, I don't know, yeah, I think even maybe a stretch 9 and 10, I don't know, but I don't know if you get too deep into the teenage years, unless they're interested in making movies themselves, if they'll go for it as much. So I found it a little bit not great. I didn't see it, and by the way, I'm a childless person. I have a niece, but and she's way too young to watch anything right now. But so maybe I don't know what I'm talking about as a single guy here, but I didn't see how this was for kids, particularly kind of with the liberal use of a few terms that I get that it's set in the 70s and 80s, and that the R word would be used a lot, but that keeps coming up, and things about the news, when he when he wins the lottery or he gets committed, or there's all these news stories, or he's up for a murder charge or whatever. They always use the R word to describe him in there. I mean, I know it's used for a purpose, but I just thought that could be misinterpreted in the way that kids use that word then when they shouldn't now. And then I kept thinking, okay, then maybe it's for certain adults, and I'm glad that it's for Larry.
Yeah.
So now I know, Larry liked it, and I'm sure lots of people liked it, and I could see the reviews were good for it, and
it's
kind of like this hidden.
The people who did watch it seem to like it, but not a lot of people.
And I love Australians are great at animation, and I love Australian films as well, and I love Toni Collette. What I clung to, I kept looking forward to Philip Seymour Hoffman's letters, because that is where the movie worked well for me.
Yeah.
When he's doing his the voiceover narration and reading those letters, I was engaged, but at no other point in the film was I as an adult. It wasn't working for me as an adult, and I don't know if it's too kiddish for adults, but too adult for kids. But I might be, as you say, underestimating kids and what they can handle. And so I feel like this is not my area of expertise, so maybe my criticisms are just subjective and my own.
Yes and no. I think that you can go too hard with it. A movie that I love that was aimed at kids, which I don't think is a kids movie, is Spike Jonze' Where the Wild Things Are.
Yeah, that's a bleak film. Yeah.
I think it's a great movie.
It is,
but not for kids. No. I don't think the kids would get it.
They didn't.
I think that kids would get this. I think they might not fully identify with the Philip Seymour Hoffman character,
the girl,
but the little girl, especially her mom's horrible. The movie doesn't make a point of vilifying her. Her mom is just her mom, but her mom is horrible, and that's how kids view it. They don't think mom's an alcoholic bully, right? They just think mom is mom, and this is what mom does, and they show that behavior. And I think in another worse version of this, we would have seen the darkness and this abuse and this. We can tell that she's neglected. We can tell that she's lonely, and just by the questions she's asking, like where do babies come from, and how do you get a boy to like you? Like, she can't ask her mom this. She's asking
this middle-aged man in New York,
who she doesn't know, completely just sent a random letter into the universe. It was the equivalent of putting a letter in the bottle and throwing it into the ocean. Other thing about this is that it purports to be based on a true story. I don't know how true it is, and part of me doesn't want to know how true it is. But the fact that they put it in this sort of landscape with the stop motion animation and the characterizations being very cartoonish, I think lends it more the feel of fantasy, which I think helps it. I think that it would have been absolutely devastating to play too overtly straight. And that's the thing, is that it's a sad movie at the end, and it's not quite Old Yeller traumatizing. Bittersweet, I think I would say.
Bittersweet is good for yeah,
but it's tricky.
But I was trying to think, if I showed that to a kid, what, I know spoilers for the movie, but we have one of our main characters is a corpse, and the other one is sitting there
holding his hand
with a baby, and it's which kids am I recommending this movie to? And the more or would be, this is a little bit more of the school teacher in me, would almost be afraid to show this to a high school or early high school class, which I think might get some of the ideas a little bit more, because I could hear kids at the back showing, he's a pedophile.
Well, it's an interesting relationship, like a relationship between a 44-year-old man and a 9-year-old girl, of course, separated by an ocean, and neither of them even having the slightest inkling of a sexual relationship.
Not at all. No,
at all. It never crosses either of their minds ever, and consequently, it doesn't us. But as a descriptor, I suppose, the story of a little girl who's a pen pal with a 44-year-old man seems kind of strange.
And his only friend is this, young girl from Australia. But
and full disclosure too, I guess, to be honest, I have an autistic child. He's obviously, very different. Like they say, you meet an autistic person, you've seen one autistic person, you don't know the whole breadth of the sweep of it. But just the idea of the loneliness and the difficulty that these people, deal with on a daily basis, and how it's their own private battle, and that this little girl makes it not a private battle for him anymore. And I love the struggle with the letters. Like I said before, like he reads the letter and then he has a full-on panic attack, and then he thinks about how he's going to write the letter. But when he does write the letter, and when you hear the letter he writes, it's amazing.
So, really, like he writes an essay to her every time,
and it's clear, it's concise. He is expressing himself like he never does. It's incredibly difficult for him. It's incredibly stressful for him, and it's incredibly good for him. They are good for each other. And I mean, it is dark. I won't lie. And I watched this by myself. I didn't watch it with the kids, and we pick a movie night every weekend. I don't know how quickly I would rush them into this one. Some of it might hit close to home, and it's sad. But the sadder ending is the ending where Max never met Mary, and he stayed in that apartment, and he probably died 15 years sooner. I don't know. It's personal, but it definitely works for me. And like I said, this specific area, there's a lot of interesting movies about it where they're making a movie for kids that have some of the biggest philosophical themes of any movie, and they're aiming it at the single-digit age category. That is a tough thing to do, and for me, they did it here. Yeah,
and I would say, like, if the strength of and how they get to the reveal of the Asperger's is really clever, and it makes a lot of sense why we were seeing, because it's almost felt like some things were played a little bit big for comedic or animated effect, but then it makes sense. And so at the same time we get that, and I would love to be in a world where show this film as a piece of awareness.
Right.
Okay, so this gives you an idea of how the world is perceived to somebody who is on the autism spectrum, let's say. Yeah. And to educate kids. I just don't know if the kids would get it until they're older, but I think they almost have to get through some sort of like the cynical adolescent years, and then maybe kind of late teens, early 20s, they start to appreciate it if they're willing to watch something like this. But I don't know if it's necessarily directed at adults, and maybe that's why it hasn't, hasn't caught on as much. As I kept trying to figure out, all right, who is the target audience? Because initially I thought it was just kids, but then it went into some places where I started to question that. I'm like, okay, this isn't for me. I don't know which kids I would show this to. I don't think it's for teenagers. I'm trying to figure out where's the sweet spot for this one to gauge whether it was successful or not. It worked for you, and so maybe you're the target audience, and then I should be giving it more of a thumbs up. But subjectively for me, I think I maybe started at a little bit of a distance from the film. And other than Philip Seymour Hoffman, some of the ideas are interesting, and other than Hoffman's amazing voice work. Yeah. Like, I mean, the energy, and again, I was more excited for his letters, and I was glad his letters were longer. Yeah. I'm not sure about Toni Collette, wonderful actor. I wasn't as interested in Mary or Mary's story at all. If the movie was just about Max, I might have been more invested, I guess. I'm a little bit surprised, but like I said, I knew that this movie was hitting me on a personal level. But I just found it warm and charming and silly. Like, the idea that you thought it felt like homework. It's an 85-minute stop-motion movie full of life and charm. Like, that surprises me. It felt... it's not longer by any means. I know it isn't, but it felt longer, a longer sit and a longer watch for me than The Master and Capote combined. which felt like long sits for you, I think.
Well, we're just going to have to respectfully disagree on this.
Yeah.
So this is going to be an interesting rank of movies because, like, we both talked a lot of shit, but we both seem to have a lot of respect. And it's weird how my rank is not going to exactly reflect my comments in some degrees, but I'm confident we're not going to go.
No, there's no way on earth. No,
there's a real chance of going 0 for 6, but there is no chance of going 6 for 6. So. That's okay. We're allowed to disagree. Fully respect. We both agree that Philip Seymour Hoffman was great in all of these movies.
Yeah, and it was a major loss.
And look at the range. Look at the range just in these 6 movies.
Yeah.
This, like, again, they're all in their different, somewhat difficult way worth your time. So let's start there, agreeing. Yeah. And now you can tell me your stupid wrong list.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how you're gonna feel about numbers. Well, yeah, you're gonna disagree with me on most of this, so I don't know. We'll see how this goes. My least favorite was Pirate Radio, hands down. I had a miserable time. I had some expectations, not overly high expectations. I didn't find it funny. I didn't find the characters charming. I think of the 6 performances, not that Hoffman's bad, but I think this was his worst of the. Or it was within his wheelhouse. He'd already done a version of this much better and Almost Famous. So that's number 6 for me. And I like Richard Curtis and I cheer for him as a filmmaker. I'd love to see him do something else, and I will pay to see anything he does. But this really was a disappointment to me. Massive disappointment. 5, I know we're really going to disagree on this one. And again, I'm going to chalk it up to this was not a movie for me.
Okay.
Mary and Max is 5th for me, which might seem unkind at how low it is, but it just wasn't for me. Those are the 2 that I would have my thumb down for. The other ones I like, but it was just kind of just various scales of how much like to love, I guess.
Right.
Synecdoche, New York is 4th for me. Big ideas, complex ideas. This feels like a movie that should be in the top 1 or 2. But I've given it another try, and I'm sure I'll give it another try another time. But I find it a very frustrating movie. And I was happy to say that, see that we were kind of in agreement about that, and the thought that there maybe aren't answers to this film. Yet I know people who love it.
Yeah.
And I guess it's like me with the Lynch movies where I love them and you're frustrated by it. So that's fine. But that's 4 for me. Number 3, not as complex, but I just had a good time with it. Not as deep as these other ones, but stayed in Maine. I liked the comedy enough. I liked enough of the characters. Great actors, and even some of the lesser actors I got enjoyment out of. I like Rebecca Pidgeon more than you do. I would call this, yeah, you're right, it's lesser Mammoth in a sense.
Yeah.
If I was given a choice between the film version of Oleana and Stayed in Maine, I would actually choose Stayed in Maine, even though that's a little bit more of
Oleana was meant for the stage.
Yeah, it's so. But I think this is good, and it's. You know, he does a few different things that he hasn't done before, but much softer Mammoth, so I liked it. Number 2 for me is Capote. I went in thinking that it was going to be homework, and I got dragged into the story pretty early on again, and the time went by fast, and I was just admiring the writing. most of the direction, and Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance, and Clifton Collins Jr. as well. I'm not sure I fully appreciated how good he was the first time I saw it. This time, just every note is pitch perfect for that guy.
To see past
and he's
Philip Seymour Hoffman the first time.
Oh yeah, how could you? But this is a guy who shows up in a lot of roles, but he's never been given a role this good, and I think it's his hands down his best performance. So again, and I'll watch Capote again. Someday I'll review it on my show too. I have a Philip Seymour Hoffman theme show as well too, which I'll do sometime in the distant future. But obviously, number one for me is Paul Thomas Anderson's The Master. Right. I don't know. Maybe I'm a sucker for Paul Thomas Anderson, and I'm being taken by a great showman here. But I just love from early on, before we even meet Philip Seymour Hoffman or see the cult stuff, I'm fascinated by Joaquin Phoenix and this guy and his journey from the war and going from one place to the other. And what I love about Paul Thomas Anderson movies is I get lost in them. I don't know where they're going. I cannot predict where they're going, and I kind of like that. So that's my list.
For me, the most messy Paul Thomas Anderson movie, like Magnolia, is still totally worth your time, right?
Yes.
Like, that might be my least favorite of his movies, but I would not tell anyone not to watch Magnolia.
Yes.
And if that's the worst movie that you made, okay.
Oh, I could live off of that.
Yeah, exactly.
That's my worst movie.
We're going to be fine. Yeah. We're going to be fine. Shocker, we have different lists. I kind of knew that. I just assumed that Paul Thomas Anderson was going to be number one for you, quite correctly. But we're going to start off in agreement. Mm-hmm. I enjoyed my time with Pirate Radio, but I didn't like myself for I saw that the movie was full of shit. I saw that I was being manipulated. I saw how off balance the narrative was. I saw that it was built out of montages. But I kind of shrugged and smiled. I don't know if it was just the absolute right day for me to watch the movie or what. But even saying all of that, I recognize it is what it is, which is pretty slight. The cast has a lot of charm to it, and the cast goes a long way. All the way in fifth place, and the fifth and fourth place were the ones that I wrestled with, but I put Synecdoche or Synecdoche, New York, because I honestly believe that it is without an answer. I do think it is a mystery without a solution. And that's baked into it is I think, possibly fatal flaw in the movie. That said, I think there are a lot of isolated scenes and moments and ideas that are in the movie that are interesting and that I like, but the movie is as much frustrating as interesting. So that I have to put it in fifth place. State and Maine is Lesser Mamet, as we have keep on saying, but Lesser Mamet is still kind of David Mamet, right? And he does have those great Mamet zinger lines, and he does have these actors who are absolutely precise in how they deliver them. They're like, what's his face from Fargo? Oh my God, this will be edited. William H. Macy. Yes. William H. Macy's been working with Mamet since the late 80s on stage.
Early theater,
He knows how to do this. So I just like watching him deliver these lines.
Yeah.
But
he keeps referring to the Broad as Sarah Jessica Parker. Yeah. Just all these Mamet-isms, he can do that so well.
I once did a zombie play for The Fringe, the Creeping Zombie Insanity. My friend Rob and I put it together. When we got hired to do it, we had 7 weeks to showtime. So we wrote, starred, produced this play in a dead run. And it wasn't great, but I mean...
I saw the show and I enjoyed it.
Yeah, it wasn't great, but for what we did, I feel like State and Maine is like David Mamet's version of that. He could have written this script in a weekend.
Yes.
A lot of people would have stressed over it or felt to dig a little bit deeper, but this was easy for him. And for that, I kind of... resent's the wrong word, but that's why it's lower tier Mamet for me. In third position, I have Capote. I started off with my negatives or sort of my resistance to it, but it's more this type of movie. I kind of, as much as the great qualities, please watch Capote. This movie was made to win Oscars. That was the goal, when it set out. I like a movie whose goal is just to be an entertaining movie, right? There's something about the calculus that goes into these movies. We need to get this kind of pedigree actor, and we need to tell this type of story, and we need to have these type of moments.
So it's an interesting story nonetheless.
All of the things that they added are interesting ingredients, and that's why these movies win awards. But I felt the calculation to a degree. And that's what's...
It was only in that last sequence not
it's only
completely.
It's the smallest resistance to it. That's sort of my complaint about the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
Second place, The Master. Love it, love it, love it, especially for the performances. Almost mainly for the performances. It is a challenging movie, but it's not obtuse. I have issues with the ending. I will puzzle over the ending, but I will revisit the ending. So it's fascinating. It's rewatchable. Check it out. Everybody's entitled to their own opinion on The Master, and that's sort of part of the interesting thing about it.
And some people would hate it. I can see people not liking it.
Some people find it difficult. I get that, but I think it's worth the conversation. Absolutely. Mary Max.
Yeah.
Made me get the feels. And part of me wants to send you home with this other stop motion movie, My Life as a Zucchini, just to see if you don't like that, then this just isn't your thing, and that's fine. You know, everyone's a lot of people don't like a lot of things that I'm into, but I love the heart, I love the feels, I love the ambition, and it's a difficult story being told to a young audience. And I have personal reasons to be connected to it, but that Philip Seymour Hoffman character was strangely profound to me. And he's not speaking on behalf of everybody with Asperger's. This is a very specific story about a very specific character, but it both warmed and broke my heart. So, number one.
Fair enough.
Thank you so much for being here, and I will continue to mourn the loss of Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah, me too.
And so another fun-filled edition of Rank and Review comes to a close. Big thanks to Jason Dubray for being here, and once again another plug for his shelf-shedding movie show. Do put your ears to that podcast. It is worth your time. Of course, Jason Dubray shall return again to Rank and Review for further arguments and further ranks. Always a pleasure to have him on board. I would also welcome feedback from my listeners at ranknreview@gmail.com. That's ranknreview@gmail.com. Check out the website at ranknreview.ca. And do tell that other movie freak in your life about Rank and Review. Thank you so much for listening.